What is up, chess YouTube? In today's video, I want to show you one simple thing that only the top 1% of online chess players understand, and despite being there roughly, I did not understand this concept in this game because I really messed this up, and this game could have been so much easier than it was. But let's find out what that one mistake was right here. In the game, white opens 1e4, I go e5, and now white goes c4. Okay. Right off the bat, this move is not the strongest move for white, but white is kind of throwing me off. Let's see how I respond. Knight f6, knight c3, so far so good, knight c6, d3, and white's going for sort of a weird English style setup here, and to be honest, I haven't played against this setup by white in a very long time, and what I should have done here is just stuck to my guns and gone bishop c5, castles, maybe d6, maybe a5, and so on. All moves I typically make in this kind of position as black. But instead, for some weird reason, in this position, I just threw my entire game plan out the window. I threw everything I know about openings, just threw it out the window, and I went for the move g6. Now, this was purely an impulse move in this game. I do recall this game very well that I recently played, and again, bishop c5 was by far the best move here, and it's also the one that is most consistent with the other openings I play as black. The Italian opening, the Roy Lopez, and so on. But here, after g6, I am effectively on my own. I have no experience in this kind of structure right here, no games to draw from, and here, I mean, I'm just getting out of my comfort zone, and it's not a good thing at all. All right, white goes h3. We have bishop g7 and bishop g5. Already, white is playing a really weird mishmash of ideas. c4, d3, e4, bishop g5, h3. I mean, these are not moves that really synergize all that well together, but to white's benefit, he has gotten me into a weird position where I don't really know the main ideas as black. All right, I castle, white goes queen d2, and here I do play a pretty good move, knight d4. Now, what is the idea behind this move, knight d4? It's very simple here with white. He's going queen d2, setting up this, is it a battery? I think it's a battery. The battery is technically with the bishop on behind the queen, but maybe it's a battery. All right, the queen bishop battery, white's threatening bishop h6, trading off the dark squared bishop, and if white can get that, he may have some decent attacking chances against the black king. But of course, I play this move knight d4, stopping the idea dead in its tracks. Now here, if white goes bishop h6, the problem with that, after bishop h6, then bishop takes, queen takes, suddenly this square c2 is exposed. The queen does not control that square. Therefore, here, knight c2 would fork the king and the rook, and therefore black would win on the spot. So, this move knight d4 tactically stops the idea of bishop h6, as then the queen would be overloaded. It would need to defend h6 as well as c2, and that is not possible. All right, here. Instead of that, white goes h4. Okay, white is really just playing a weird mishmash of moves so far. I go h6, putting the question to the bishop. Now, the benefit of this move, number one, it's a good move. Number two, it lays a very dangerous trap. Again, if white takes on h6, I take back, and if the queen takes, then knight c2 hits the king, and suddenly I am up material. So what happens? We have bishop e3. Now, knight g4, I played in the game, another very good move. So far, it looks like I'm playing well. It looks like I'm finding all the right moves, but that is just what's happening at the surface. The truth is, I'm just not all that comfortable with this kind of game as black. I don't play these King's Indian style positions very often, so white is getting closer and closer to getting me into this weird no man's zone, no man's land where I don't really know what the plans are all that well. We have knight f3, and here I make kind of a big mistake. It turns out I don't have to take on e3. Instead, I can go, say, f5, gaining space, potentially threatening f4 later, and that would have been the right idea, sort of in the spirit of the King's Indian defense. But again, I'm not a big King's Indian player, and I just take on e3, which is not a terrible move, but it's certainly not the best. White takes back, and suddenly my knight cannot stay on d6. So I go back to c6, but now white castles long, and look at this. This is the real problem that I got into in this game. This is not a position I want as black. I don't want as black these kinds of crazy opposite sides castling scenarios where I have to go potentially, a6, b5, and white's going h5 and so on. I like to attack, my opponents, not the other way around. So after all of this craziness, white gets this position where he's comfortable. He's castling queenside, he's launching the alpha 0 pawn, and I'm kind of at a loss for the absolute best ways to respond. So despite having an even position, I really don't know the best ways to proceed. I mean, I know the main ideas, attack the opponent's king, but I don't have it all mapped out the same way I do my typical openings. So this shows why it is so important to have your openings really, really mapped out, really fleshed out, and you stick to them. That way, when you play more and more games, all of your experience in these same types of positions stacks on top of each other, and you just get better and better. Whereas if you play wildly different openings like I'm doing right here, big mistake by me, your experience doesn't stack, you don't improve as fast, and it's so much easier to get stuck and get into these weird games. So really, the mistake in this game, from my perspective, was on move 4, bishop c5 was the right idea. Instead, I went g6, and I got into this position right here with a whole bunch of problems. All right, so what do? I start a6. Not a bad idea. My point is, I want to go b5, trying to open up lines against the white king. Maybe b5 right away is good. Maybe I go rook b8 first, not sacrificing a pawn. Either way, it's the right idea. White goes g4. All right, white is just going for it here. Rook b8, not a bad idea. b5 immediately is likely playable. The point being, after c takes, then a takes, then knight takes, white wins a pawn, as that square is controlled twice by white, once by black after b5. But then I could go rook b8, for example. b5, c takes, a takes, knight takes, rook b8, and maybe I've got some activity here. Maybe I capture on a2 instead, and so on. So b5 right away was likely the right idea. Instead, rook b8 is what I played here, and this is probably a little bit slower. All right, white goes knight d5, and I do go b5. Now here, white goes c5. The idea behind this move, he's trying to keep the queen side closed, which in principle is not a bad idea. Obviously, if he takes on b5, I can capture with either the rook or the pawn here. Either way, the queen side is opening up, but it turns out white's best idea is to just ignore the queen side entirely and just get on with his attack with, say, g5 or rook g1 and so on. Now, instead here, white goes c5. 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 All right, this move obviously does keep the queen side closed. That is one benefit of this move. But here, as black, I can go d6, which is sort of a multi-purpose move. First of all, I am threatening c5. Second of all, if white takes, he opens up the c file for me. Third of all, this bishop on c8 now has access to the e6 square, so a decent idea by me. White takes. And here, the right move is queen takes d6. Instead, I'll recapture with the c-pawn. But again, this is mostly due to it's a blitz game, and I simply don't have a good feel for how to play these King's Indian style positions. It's just not my cup of tea as black. Anyway, g5 by white. h5, trying to block the king side. White goes king to b1. And here, the best move for black, it's not what I play. The best move is bishop g4, pressuring that knight on f3, activating a piece, and the king side would be relatively closed for a while. But instead, I go b4. This is my gut instinct. I need to attack on the queen side. The best way is to push the pawns. But again, bishop g4 was the right idea. Now, white goes bishop e2. A good move, developing, connects the rooks, and also preemptively guards that knight on f3. Therefore, any kind of bishop g4 idea would be a lot weaker. Instead, I go bishop e6. White jumps in with the knight f6. I take twice here, but then white goes knight g5, pressuring my bishop, and suddenly white has these open lines on the g file and the f file. And again, I'm starting to feel kind of uncomfortable here. And again, this just shows why the top 1% of players, they know it is so important to specialize and master a small number of openings and then try to play those openings again and again and always try to get positions that they're familiar with. This is what I do. It's one of the reasons my rating blew up the past year online. But in this game, again, I just for some reason, just lashed out with g6 and got this weird game where I'm just not really comfortable. All right, here. The best idea is to preserve this bishop with bishop g7. Instead, I go a5. Again, my gut instinct is I should probably go a5, a4, a3, alpha 0 style, but it's not really the best idea immediately. All right, white, rook d, g1, developing, king to h8. At this point, I'm scared of my king being on this g file, so I go king h8, but it turns out white doesn't have any immediate threat, so it wasn't that big of a deal. My concern was some sort of like bishop takes h5 idea, then knight takes with the attack on the king, and maybe there was something there. So king h8, decent idea in principle, I suppose, but bishop d7 would have been better. The point being, if you drop back, then the knight doesn't have like a good square to go to, and therefore any sort of bishop takes idea wouldn't be that strong in the first place. So that was the right idea. Instead, king to h8, rook f1, I go queen g7, a good square for the queen, rook f2, and now I continue the attack with a4 and then a3, alpha 0 style. That's how I roll here on this channel. All right, white, b3, then I go d5. Decent idea in principle. I'm trying to open up the center, maybe open up, some more diagonals from my pieces. Trying to b2 potentially, but turns out tactically not the best idea here. It just doesn't work out. Instead, knight to e7, it turns out, is the right sequence, but again, I'm just not a pro at this kind of position, so I'm really suffering here. So d5, we have rook f6. White is attacking, and I would let me tell you, I would much rather be white right here than black. So rook b to e8, we have e takes d5. Bishop takes, e4, drives back the bishop, and then bishop d1, dropping back with that piece. We have knight d4, jumping in, queen to f2, rook e7, both sides trying to attack f7 and defend. And again, the computer says I'm doing better here, but I just don't like my game. All right, queen d2, rook b8, rook 1 to f2, bishop to g4, and this was the big mistake here, because white here has a really beautiful sequence here. He just takes on g4, I take back, and here in this position, try to find the right move for white. Try to pause the video, just try to find the key idea for white right here that he should be playing. Well, the key idea, obviously, white is overloading this square f7 with the two rooks and the knight. I've only got two defenders. Therefore, white should have some way to capture here and potentially win the game. And it turns out knight takes f7 with check is borderline deadly. The point being, if the king goes here, white goes h5. And if I take the pawn, then rook h6 is check, and everything is defended. And from there, after king g1, rook h1 would effectively win the game like this. G takes, rook h6, king g1, rook h8. It's a nasty sequence here, and I basically have to give up the queen here for the rook, and it's just, it's not good. But going back here, fortunately, white left me off the hook, and let me tell you, did I make use of this? All right, white, he plays the move rook takes not knight takes, rook takes f7 here. And this move, massive blunder, it throws away the advantage, but it's not obvious why it does. At first glance, wait a minute, white wins the pawn. He's defended. What's going on here? Well, fortunately, I was pretty resourceful in this game. Now, black here has 3 seconds left on the clock. That certainly motivated me, so I was feeling pretty good about that. So I'm fighting on. I take with the rook. White takes. And now here, I'm starting to get some ideas. Queen to h6, trying to be tricky here. But it turns out rook to f8 is the winning move. Here's why. It's kind of insane. Rook f8, if the rook takes, rook f1. Look at this. The king cut off on the back rank. The knight controls this square. The alpha 0 a pawn controls this square. Queen to c1 is forced. You take the queen, take the rook, and it turns out this position with the passed pawn on the b file is winning for black. Now, I didn't find that, but I found a similar idea very, very soon. Queen to h6, white goes rook h7, and this is a mistake. I give up the queen, queen takes, knight takes, king takes. White now has 6 seconds left. There's a 2-second increment, so every move, white gets 2 more seconds, as do I, so white is hanging in there. Here, white should be going queen g5, setting up some sort of perpetual check. But instead, queen g2. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Rook f8. There's got to be something here. That's my thought process. Maybe it's like a b3, g3, rook to f2 sort of scenario. There's got to be something, because this looks dangerous. The alpha 0 pawn obviously cutting off the king, the knight cutting off the king here, the rook potentially on the back rank. There's got to be something here. White goes king c1. And then I go g3, pushing the pawn, setting up rook to f2 ideas. And not only that, I lay a deadly trap, and white walks right into it with 5 seconds left. Queen takes g3, and of course, the big finale, knight to e2, hits the king, hits the queen, and white here just lets the clock run out in absolute horror, and I do win this game against my decently rated player here. Now, going back to the opening, this is really the lesson I want you guys to learn. This is a lesson top 1% players have to learn the hard way. It's really about mastering a small subset of openings and trying to get positions that are very similar to those openings, again and again and again in your games, and not trying to mix it up, not trying to go for new things, but just sticking to what you're very good at, to what you understand. And here, I'm very good with bishop c5. I'm very good with these kinds of structures like this, where I'm getting these things in, I'm going like d6 and so on. I know these structures inside and out for black. I'm very, very comfortable here. Instead of that, I'm just frustrated by white's weird setup, and I go g6. Absolutely no reason, no logic. I just lash out, and from there, white slowly gets kind of this aggressive position with basically long castling after a couple more moves, and suddenly I'm in this position in the middle game. We're 12 moves in, where I do not like my position at all. Now, the computer says I'm a little better here, but the problem is I'm burning so much time starting now trying to find the optimal plan, the optimal way to proceed, and it just leads to massive problems for me later in the game. So let this be a lesson for you. The top 1% of chess players, they have a very small subset of openings they have mastered, that they're very comfortable in, that they analyze and understand. They analyze their games in those openings. They learn from those games. They work with the coach. They learn those openings over and over and over, and they get really good at them. And these chess players, these top 1% players, they might be really good in opening ABC, but actually really bad in opening XYZ, because they haven't studied opening XYZ anywhere near as much as the ABC opening. So what do? They just play ABC opening and not XYZ. It's really simple, but I did not follow my own advice in this game, and I got brutally punished up until the very end of the game, when I somehow found this crazy idea of g3, rook f2, and so on, and white fell for my trap. So I got left off the hook, but in this game, I was punished for not following my own advice. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button. I hope it helped you guys figure out some, ideas for how to structure your own, training programs, your own repertoires and whatnot. But anyway, that is all for today. So as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond.